Alright, response video to some guy. Don't know who the heck he is. I don't remember. But anyway.
First time I'm making a video to you because I found the Love Yourselves video quite provocative and interesting. I think there's two things I have about this, two problems I have with this argument you're making. And I guess it's the main 2 points of the argument. And the first is the idea that there are absolutes. I mean, this is really a fundamental point of difference here that it's probably impossible to convince someone of once they have taken a firm stance on it. The whole idea.
Oh, well, whatever. I mean, that's sort of a cop-out. You know, yeah, okay, so there's this basic argument that you say this doesn't exist, you know, absolutely, and this doesn't exist absolutely, and that I don't exist absolutely because this could all be a matrix in, you know, something. There could be some other context where this reality is not reality. Yeah, fine. You want to say you don't have enough probabilistic evidence to put things in categories and call certain things absolutes because the probabilistic standard of proof is high enough. That's all it is. There's always a standard of proof, right? I mean, absolute proof, okay, maybe we can't have that. But we can have this thing that we can commonly agree on that once it goes past this level, it's good fucking enough. And so you want to say there's no such level? Fine, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
The absolute seems absurd to me. And basically the reason is I believe
well, it seems absurd. You know, if you're going to say there's no such thing, then there's no way for humans to ever agree. Because everybody can always use this cop-out. Well, there's no absolute proof. There's no absolute. It's just it turns into nonsense. So you want us to use the word like absurd? What's absurd is to sit there and say there's no standards of proof. There are standards of evidence. There is a little tiny bit of evidence. There's no evidence, and there's a big giant pile of evidence. And those things have to be given different respect. It's ludicrous not to.
Can be tautological absolutes in the sense that if we define, once we have some base definitions that are arbitrary, it's kind of like geometry. Once we describe what a point is, what we're going to refer to as a point.
Yeah, right. Well, they're not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary to agree that, okay, let's concede that Hansel and Gretel is a fantasy. It's not reality. That the goose that laid the golden egg is a fantasy, not a reality. It was made up by somebody. It's a story. It has nothing to do with reality. Let's agree to certain things. I mean, what is wrong with doing that? A premise is perfectly logical to build some sort of construct within which we can have a conversation that has some meaning and is rational. If we can't agree that rain is wet, then we might as well just throw the language, the words, the communication in the fucking toilet. There's no fucking point. There's no fucking point in you having an intelligence if you refuse to communicate with other intelligences because you won't say, oh yes, well that's what the word means. If the word can't even have a definition, then there's nothing to discuss as true. There's no fucking goddamn point, and you're being fucking ludicrous.
Once we describe what we're going to refer to as a line is, then we can describe what triangles are, and the idea of superposition and things like this in quantum physics. But if we don't have these arbitrary definitions that really refer to things that don't literally exist, then we can't.
Well, I mean, sorry. I mean, again, using a word like arbitrary is like using a word like erroneous. Like you just pull it out of nothing. That it has no sensible, meaningful purpose or use. And these boundaries are not just contrivances. They have integrity. It's just sensible for words to have definitions.
Absolutes that exist, right? So I believe in tautological. If we describe bad, if we define bad as suffering or death or pain or inequality, whatever we choose to define.
Yeah, well, look, that's silly to use an example of a word that has. That's like saying, well, if we define love as, of course, everybody's going to have a different definition of those words. So let's not start with a word so purely generic and meaningless. And let's qualify the definitions. So if we're going to say something is negative or is useless to the net productive product. And then we can qualify what the definition and say it's useless because it has no short-term or long-term benefit, or it needs to be qualified. It needs to be explicit. So some work has to be done to make sure the language has meaning. But it's just kind of silly to just throw a word like bad out there, then throw a couple of your little sloppy definitions at it, and say that's what we're going to. That's the context, and that's why everything's ambiguous and messy. Well, you just made it ambiguous and messy. It's not by its nature ambiguous and messy. You just made it ambiguous and messy. You just made it sloppy. It doesn't have to be sloppy.
Then we can go on to say that certain things are absolutely bad, and in this way we can have absolute morality. But it's clearly not absolute because it relies on a tautology, kind of circular logic of, well, bad is this.
It's not circular. It's linear. I mean, you have to progressively agree on these realities. I mean, it's like you can't do trigonometry until you do algebra and geometry and these other. You can't. You have to foundation the structure. But to call it circular because you're essentially justifying it somehow, re-justifying itself, that's not what it's doing. I mean, it's creating a foundation. There's nothing illegitimate about a foundation.
And this thing contains this, so therefore it is bad. Shit is bad food, so therefore shit sandwich is still bad food, and shit pasta is still bad food. But if you're a fly, the base...
If you're a fly, right, so just pull out of your ass something to recontextualize the statement. Obviously, if you say a shit sandwich sucks, flies don't eat sandwiches, generally speaking. I mean, they make little fly sandwiches or something. So to them, it's not a sandwich. Okay, it's a completely different animal. So when you said the word sandwich, you're already implying a human consumption. So the conversation was already narrowed to human consumption. So yes, a shit sandwich for humans would be shit. It would suck. It would be lousy. So it's just, what are you going to say? Well, it's the shit of the European, whatever, consummate bee, and that shit is excellent. Excellent quality shit. Well, who's thinking about the shit of some fucking bee in Europe? No, when we hear the word shit, we're thinking about dog or cat or pig or self or something else. So these words, again, unless you're going to sit there, you're using circular in the sense that you're just taking advantage of the convenience where you're going to say a statement and then pick apart your own straw man. You built the straw man, you created a sloppy enough statement, and then you sit there and pick at your own sloppiness of your own statement. So big fucking deal. You found holes in your own straw man? Wow, whoop-de-doo.
Premise doesn't hold. Shit isn't bad food. Shit is great food. So shit sandwich is that much better. So it's absurd to argue. I mean, you bring up the Holocaust. I think that's
it's absurd to argue that I'm a fly. That we were talking as if we are flies. That's absurd.
People are just afraid. I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't say afraid. People don't want to disagree with that for fear of seeming callous or whatever. But I mean, clearly it's based on this tautological premise that human suffering and murder and genocide are bad. But you go on to argue for genocide later in your video, which then makes me question,
where was the genocide? I didn't argue for genocide. That's a genetic standard, okay? Gen is in there. But what I argued for is the fact that if you're going to create a slave state, then your own sons and daughters should be the slaves. That was the purpose of my argument, basically. Is if you're going to create a stupid world, then only your stupid children, you should be victim of your own creation. That was my argument. And you should leave people with sensibilities that find it offensive out of your game. If you're going to put kids on a rickety roller coaster, they should be your fucking kids, not somebody else's kids. And if you can't get the theme of that argument, then I'm sorry. I don't. I mean, do I really have to go through the whole? I mean, do I have to pick it to pieces to make it understandable to you that it's a metaphor? And I'm just pointing out that if you're going to create a world that's really sloppy, and you're going to say it's okay, that it should only be people who think it's okay and who invest in the sloppiness and who want and accept the sloppiness who are subjected to the sloppiness. Not that hard to figure out. But, you know, we'll get to the rest
Premise
of
for the
it.
Holocaust being met. I mean, you go on to say what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy, etc., are our subjective feelings, which are subjective, but they are not all there is. There are these objective things. So if you think what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy is subjective, and that's somewhat differentiated from these absolutes, like people suffering in the Holocaust is bad, what's the difference there? I mean, clearly we define what happened in the Holocaust.
The difference is the difference created by this notion of desire. It's the difference between somebody who likes the Yankees and somebody who likes the Dallas Cowboys. Well, I guess they don't play the same sport, but whatever. You get my drift. One is just an arbitrary, erroneous preference, and one of them is something we define in a very explicit and sensible manner. It has